Okay, welcome everyone. So we're on LinkedIn. We're also on YouTube. If people on YouTube have any questions, we're going to follow the LinkedIn chat. So jump over there if you have questions there. But I'm going to do a quick intro of the panel. We'll talk a little bit about the topic, and then we'll get into some questions. We're going to be on for about a half an hour. For those that are listening to the recording here, welcome. Obviously, you won't have the live chat, but I'll be monitoring things for the next several days. So if you have questions, throw in there. I'll try to answer them as they show up. So today's panel. Today we're going to talk about role scorecards. We're going to talk about performance metrics. And really kind of the critical role that these things set in terms of expectations, defining success for your team, and really how a well-performing company really focuses on this. I find that companies that are doing quite well have a pretty good system for setting role scorecards, setting performance metrics, managing these things, evolving these things as a company changes, and really empowering employees and offering them a real clear path to success. I think one thing we always try to do as leaders is help our people be successful, and role scorecards, performance metrics are one of key ways to do that. So we've got two panelists today joining me. First one, Jen Goldman. Jen is a seasoned professional business operations transformer and integrator, over 30 years of experience. She's helped countless businesses enhance people, productivity, profitability, and presence, achieving impressive outcomes like significant profit increases and capacity growth. She is passionate about guiding small businesses to sustainable success and growth. Jen, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good job there.
And next up, I've got Eric Thorsen. Eric is a seasoned tech entrepreneur, over 23 years of experience. He's a CEO and founder of Thor Solutions, and Eric has a deep understanding of business growth and scaling strategies. He now dedicates his time and expertise to helping founders achieve their visions. Eric, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you. And I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm a strategic leadership coach. I help CEOs scale and exit their businesses faster, hopefully with a little less drama. And I work with CEOs and coach them, help leadership teams develop effective and practical growth strategies, achieve sustainable long-term results. And let's get into the topic today. So performance metrics, role scorecards. Why don't we start with just a quick go around of what do we really mean, or what do we put into role scorecards? Like when we talk about role scorecards, what does it mean for you? Jen, let's start with you. Give us a couple of things that you look for in a role scorecard.
Yeah, so I look for, there's a little more subjective and there's objective. We'd like to be fully objective if we can. Yeah. And there's the soft skills and then there's the technical skills. So usually our scorecards are either 2 sections or 3 sections if you have to visualize it. And they're less than 2 pages, I can assure you. I'm all about.
I guess why? Why less than 2 pages?
Yeah. Anything more than that, it seems like a book, and people don't do it. So, so those are the sections that I absolutely insist on.
Okay, great. Eric, when we talk about role scorecards, what comes up for you?
So there's a couple of things. We were talking about this earlier. Like there's this alignment that is really powerful when organizations do it well, right? Like so I think when organizations really do a good job of understanding what their purpose and core values are, and they thread that throughout their entire process, whether that's the hiring process and having scorecards that are there, and then those scorecards then eventually become sort of the beginnings of when you onboard somebody into how they're going to be fitting into the organization, and then ultimately, depending on the role, you've got a set of sort of high level, like why did we hire you? You're serving this role in this organization, and so we like having broad definitions about what the activities that they're expected to do are, right? Project managers maybe managing teams, organizing people. Then there's things that are measurable, like what are they measuring, and what are they timely? Sort of like the SMART goal things, and what are the meeting rhythms there, and then also like how does this plug into the broad vision? And so the scorecards that are about performance metrics are tied in also to what the company is doing strategically, so that people understand, you were talking about, whatever particular thing they're being measured on, whether, depending on what the role is, how does that impact the overall strategy of the business? So we always like to make sure that the scorecards, when they get to these KPIs piece, how is that actually impacting the organization overall? Because that's another thing is what we're trying to do, as you said in the beginning of this opening, is we want to empower people, right? We want people to really feel like, okay, I know that I'm pushing this, these buttons over here that are serving a purpose that I kind of understand the purpose of pushing those buttons, but what does that mean for the organization about what we're really trying to do, the impact we're really trying to have?
Yeah. I guess, and when do you typically start working on role scorecards? Like what is the process for developing a role scorecard? When does it start for each of you?
I'm going to say it starts with your first hire.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, it evolves, right? You learn as you go.
Mm-hmm.
We don't like to say we get the perfect one first, just like the perfect hire first, and we don't. So yeah, so I actually start with first. I'm very much about inclusivity though, meaning that I believe a scorecard, there's some best practices, we all know them, but I think it should be done with the employee involved with the employer or the boss.
Yeah.
So I think it's, hey, this is what we hired you for. And now that you're in, we want to develop this even more. What do you think should be included? How would you want to be measured? Or, and I think that's easier too. Because especially, I mean, listen, you guys work with bigger companies, but you don't have this kind of time to spend all day and night talking to yourself, figuring this out. So working with somebody else.
If you do, it's a different issue.
Yeah, that's a whole different issue. Exactly.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Eric, your thoughts on timing? Like how do you typically, when do you introduce scorecards?
So it's funny, when you first asked me, I was thinking, I always have this thing when I think about like when I first started to my first business and when I was doing this and how I help other people. So like when I first started, like scorecards, what is that? Right. So like, but I love what Jen just said about including them, because like I said, when we started using Top Rating like a long time ago, right? And so like, there's a whole scorecard part of that process that is about both the culture piece and then the actual tasks. And then what I really like about what Jen said, and we do the same thing and encourage others to do it, is the employees involved, right? Because like if you really found somebody who's aligned with how they're going to operate in your organization, we always encourage people, you're really looking for top people who are passionate about what they're doing. They're going to have ideas that you're not thinking of, right? And again, you've got people who are bold enough to sort of say, that's great, I can do all those things, but you're missing this, and this, right? And then you wind up getting this rich thing that's more aligned to them being able to move the ball forward, right? So I think what Jen is saying about really incorporating them into the process is really important.
Yeah. I run into a lot of situations, coming into reasonably large teams, and they don't have scorecards. And what I'll do is I'll actually have the manager and the report complete their own scorecard. So they'll each create a scorecard, and then they come together and they compare notes. And
it's brilliant.
More times than not, Eric, you mentioned this, that the employee scorecard is tougher than the managers.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what we're actually trying to do is dial it down and saying, okay, great. Like we know there's all 15 things you want to be able to do, but let's figure out what are the, 5 to 8 really important things that we absolutely have to get done. And then we can put some stretch on here and we can talk about, okay, maybe we can add these things over time once we've got, things stabilized. But it gets information on the table, because oftentimes managers don't know what their reports are really doing. It also, I find, is buy-in, right? Like if the direct is participating in the process, they're much more likely to see it as a tool that's helping them rather than a stick that's being used to, punish them in different ways.
Yeah, I want to cap on Eric and you, Bruce.
Yeah.
This is also when you see the employee doesn't understand the goals and the organizational goals.
Yeah.
Right? Like if they are scoring something different, and then let's say you're the manager or the mentor, you come in and say, why would I care about that? It's a great opportunity to then align that and then also realize, okay, spot check. I got to go back, and whether it's a company meeting, a team meeting, I got to set the table again and explain these are our goals as the company.
Yeah.
That's so true. There's something else too that you triggered two thoughts when you were explaining. I love that, by the way, the thing about putting them in a separate room. I think it's brilliant because it nails home something, right? Their perspectives, right? Everybody's perspectives in the organization are different.
Yeah.
And so you're bringing all these people with these mixed perspectives in and trying to accomplish this thing that's being consumed from the outside, right?
Yeah.
But what I really like about what you were talking about too is that there are two things I thought about. One is like, it's sort of the art of delegation, right? People, you as leaders, like we want our people to thrive, but like we don't burn them out, either. And so like there's this balance of like them buying into what's happening. And then I think the other piece too, like when you started out and said a lot of organizations don't have scorecards, there is this feeling of like oversight, like, you know, it's too much oversight, you know, am I going to be really hampering in them? And I'd love to hear what you guys experience in this, though. The opposite wound up happening, right? Like when I really had better scorecards that are defined, particularly aligned with where the company was headed from the strategic vision side, it was amazing to see the productivity and creativity that came out of people versus my initial thoughts around this was like, oh no, I'm putting handcuffs on them. Like I'm saying, no, you got to do it like this. What's your experience been with like effective scorecards like this?
I can sort of to the point I made before, where I usually start by having each side come up with a list of responsibilities, and once they set the list of responsibilities, and then I send them off and saying, okay, how do you want to be measured? And then what is success look like? And I like 3 levels. It's like, okay, if we're not at least this level, we have a serious problem, right? Like this is the bottom absolute minimum performance. This is the goal. And then anything over this is exceptional. And oftentimes it's when it's figuring out what is the yardstick we're going to use, and then what is the actual expectation, is where you get some really interesting results. And in there is where I like to see a lot of stretch. Like I like to see managers that have the ability to say, okay, look, you know, we're we expect 50 per week right now. Let's get 50 per week, and then we're going to expect 60. And then it's like, okay, what would it take to do 100? Like, what would we have to change about the process? What tools would you need? What resources would you need? So it becomes this tool for constantly figuring out how to get improvement and innovation and driving performance. Usually I'm working with fairly high growth teams that need to do this anyway. But if we can drive that from the employee side, if it's like, give them the chart and let them figure out how to start setting bigger and bigger goals, it creates a really motivation process rather than this kind of constraining process. That's my experience in this.
Yeah, and I want to cap on what you said, like iterations, right, or tranches of growth. And that's why I find, I'm going to flip this for a second. I find that it's the managers that don't. They see it as so labor intensive. So my first thing is, well, first of all, if the employee is doing most of the drafting, forming, buying in, and if you met every quarter, that's in essence servant leadership. We can call it what we want, but it's like, what do you need from us to hit those goals? Why are you running into those troubles? So instead of this like intensive annual performance review, and the manager's like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't want to have to write the book, and the employees don't want to be surprised. I think we can get away from that, make this easier and more approachable. Yeah. So I don't know if it's the employees as much that don't want to do it. I think it's the managers too.
I like seeing it in the weekly review. I mean,
that's what I was I was going to say the same thing. Like, I think there's a piece too, like that now we're talking about, like, what are the meeting rhythms? What are the review periods? Where does this fit in? Because you're right, like that, like annual reviews are like a train wreck, right? It's like, who remembers? Like everybody's scrambling to do this thing, and having some portion of this, you know, that's just in the weekly reviews, whatever, you know, if you're doing rocks or those kinds of things, so that it's visible and people see it. I think there's something else too that you're talking about here, Bruce, which is important. Like I you know, being in tech for like 30 something years, like I don't remember where I first heard it, but like it's it's one of these every other week there's something new and shiny, right, and it's like, wow, that's, you know, I have this problem and that's going to solve it for me. And what's really great about, and there are like, there's new and shinier things every week now that it's hard to keep track of, that may actually have some tangible value. But what I like about what you were talking about, where now somebody can come to you and say, okay, I have a new shiny thing. Okay, so I read about 40 of them this morning on my newsfeed. This is going to make my number, you know, go from here to here. And here's how I can actually practically apply that tool in that. And that's very empowering, right? That's empowering for our employees. And like we're heading into like another area here where I'd love to hear some feedback about you guys about this too, is there's the room for allowing them to grow, right? Like, so a big part of what I've done with my organizations, and I always encourage others, and this is some companies get this right away, some are really hard to get this, is like, carving out time for professional development, whatever that means, and making sure that's part of their requirements in their job. Like, it's not like, read on the weekends and do what you're doing at night. I mean, most of the people that are passionate about what they're doing are trying to figure out something there, but it's like, how do you incorporate that into the metrics? Like, we come up with professional development programs, and we'll say, okay, what are you looking for this year? What are you looking for this quarter? And how are we going to fit that in? And like, that becomes part of the scorecard too. Like, and it's aligned. It's not hard to align where, at least my experience has been, it's not hard to align where they want to go with something that's important for the organization, right? Sometimes it's cross department, cross discipline. Like, I have engineers who are, wickedly great at software engineering or architecture and want to learn networking. Well, it's not that hard a lift to sort of shift them into some of that work, right?
Yeah.
So how do you guys find? I think there's two questions for me that I'm curious about your experience, Jen and Bruce. Like, from a perspective of how organizations are with receiving this kind of idea of carving out a piece that's not necessarily directly related to generating revenue, but in my experience generates really like incredible performance from employees. What's your been experience with this part?
Yeah, I actually apply it. So basically, in the weekly meeting structure that we give the businesses, at the top are the goals. So that ties in the organizational goals. And at the bottom is the wins. And in the middle are the improvements. And it's every week. I just love what you said, though, because I actually didn't think about that in the scorecard. We also believe in an education fund.
Yeah.
Used and shared, meaning you don't just go and learn something. You come back in the month, like once a month meeting, and you share top 3 key points. And not everyone's going to be interested because you have different modalities of understanding, knowledge, learning, passion. But yeah, so we kind of thread it all the way through in the weekly and then in the monthly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
The rhythm that I like to see, kind of the base model that I try to put in place, is quarterly reviews of the scorecard. All right. So there's a formal sit down every quarter, review the scorecard, make adjustment to it, change, whether you're changing responsibilities or changing KPIs or changing targets, right? You agree. It's kind of a negotiation between the direct and the manager around those things. And then you pick a very specific set of learning goals for that quarter. And that's part of where are you going with your scorecard, right? What do we need to do to get you to the next level of scorecard in the coming quarters? Therefore, what are the learning objectives you need to put in place? And then the weekly, what I like about it is that the weekly for the manager is basically, I just sit down. The employees should come to me with their scorecard sort of basically noted up, saying, hey, look, I'm hitting these numbers. I'm not hitting these numbers. This is why. This is where I need help. This is what I'm going to do to hit these. And there's a discussion. Like, now I can serve as, mentor and coach in that process and help them to achieve it. But I'm not bringing the scorecard. They're bringing their own scorecard, right? They're measuring themselves. And, if there's a performance issue, they know about it long before I do, right? Like, it's not the case of I'm coming to them with, hey, look, I've been looking at these numbers and it's been a problem for a while. Like, they should know that up front. And then there's the whole, like, how long are they in the scorecard? What I like to see is, once someone is pretty hitting their numbers on a scorecard, I want to start working on the next scorecard, right? Like, I want to figure out what is the next role I'm moving into. And I sometimes even run double scorecards for a while, right? For a quarter or two, where, okay, you're still working this job, but we're starting to get you into this one. How are you doing on that one as well? So that we've got a sense of what is the evolution in that process.
Do either of you, I was just thinking about all this, and you're talking about professional development. Do either of you incorporate professional development time maybe into your messaging, like beyond just the meetings? And for example, if you're sitting down and talking about time blocking or time management, which some people need a lot of help with, right? Or other, do any of you guys thread it in that way to say it is part of our mantra here to be learning and sharing?
Eric, I'll let you
without a doubt. And so that is part of what we block out is professional development time. Like, depending on it does depend somewhat on some seasonal business that my consultancy has, but I encourage people to do this. Some companies do 20%, some do 5%, some do 10%. And the intention is to carve out a chunk of time for them to do this. And one of the things that has been tricky is people don't learn the same way, right? Like there are people who really love flow, and so their thing is like, give me time to learn, but I just want to do it all, every other week in this block of time. Other people like, no, I need a chunk of time every day. And so we used to sort of have this, now we're going to chunk out, people in different times because we've got commitments, right? So we can't like pull like, oh, there's nobody working today, right? Like, so it's really like had to mix it up. But we did get to a place where we wanted them to be accountable for what they were doing. And so like people were working on like, I don't know, they might be working even together on some of these things or learning about it. But I think the other portion that you're talking about, Jen, that is important is like sharing back. And so we have meetings every week where different teams get together and they talk about shared problem solving, and people will present on something that they're messing around with or experimenting with and learning. We don't do a lot of dictation though. That's an interesting thought about like, should we do something on time management? And so that's kind of interesting. I hadn't quite thought about it like that. It's more of like, it's somewhat self-directed as long as it's aligned with the objectives of what the organization's trying to do.
Yeah. Our thing we used to do, we had lunch and learns. And so part of what you had to do is present at a lunch and learn on whatever it is you were working at, whatever professional development. And sometimes, it was highly relative to lots of other people. Sometimes it wasn't, right? But it was a little bit of this, okay, you got to present, right? Like you've got to actually come and explain to people, like, what have you been using? Because our feeling was it was company time, right? And if the company essentially was going to invest in you for doing that, then you had to, bring back to the company, present back to the company what value we were getting from that. So it wasn't perfect, but I think it created enough peer pressure, right? Or just kind of like accountability for what are you spending your time on, that it created a little bit of focus and made sure people were kind of getting something done as part of that.
Again, back to the scorecard, right? If you see it and they're presenting, then it's valid on the scorecard, right? Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that come up in scorecards that you've seen and some ways around that? Like one I'll throw on the table is a lot of this stuff can kind of get subjective. It's like, okay, well, did you do this? Did you not do? Are you good at this? Are you not good at this? And I always find, there's some way of making it objective, like some sort of survey, like ask 3 people and have them score it from 1 to 5 or something like anything you can do to try to make it somewhat measurable can be helpful. But what are some strategies or what are some challenges that you've had around scorecards and how have you solved them?
Do you want to go first, Jen, or you
go first?
All right, she's going to think.
I'm happy to jump in. So like,
I
think, I'm a data guy, right? I'm an ex-engineer, right? So I love numbers, but what you are talking about is painful, right? Like, because you are talking about things that are harder to measure. And this is particularly true when you're talking about like, core values, right? Like, are you building trust with customers? Right? Like what's the score for that? Are you helping your peers? Are you being empathic? Are you saying what needs to be said? Like, how do you measure those things? And some level of that really, from my experience, is when it becomes a problem, I do think those things tend to come up pretty easily, like when they're really problematic, right? So some examples of that are like, I happen to fall into the the sort of the core value part of your question, which may not be what you were thinking about, Bruce, but it's what came to my mind. So we do a bunch of things around like ensuring, because it's for me, this has been such an impactful part of the success of more organizations and success I've seen in other organizations. Like, I would never start a company without this. I always ask people, like, what's your culture like? Are you really locking it down? Like this whole thing about like supporting it throughout the organization, core value shout outs, and people really getting into that, and even, rewarding each other for it. What I find is that when those things become problematic, they kind of come up pretty easily. Like, you're building trust with customers. Well, no, this person's like failed, 4 times, or they're not responding to like those things tend to come up. Some of the other ones about like, effective communication with teams, like I don't like things like that, right? Like what I really want to understand is like, what does that mean to be effective communication, right? It's like, well, I'm communicating with the customer, whatever it is, like twice a month, we're sending them this, and then we always ask for feedback and we get a Likert scale. Like, keep it simple. Yeah. If there's any way that I can tie any of these subjective things to some sort of tangible activity and data, that's what I always lean towards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead, Jen.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to say, you were mentioning this kind of role versus the core values. I do often have a section that's role specific, and then a section that's global, relative to the company. And, these are responsibilities and metrics, KPIs that we have relative to your role and your current level of role. And then these are things we measure with everyone, whether it's core values or just, general things that everyone in the company is responsible for, just so that I can kind of distinguish those. And the value one is tough. I do, I like the idea of people self-evaluating those things and then give me evidence, right? Like explain to me why you've scored yourself this way. And those become a little bit more of a conversation and figuring out, okay, where are we aligned on core values and where are we not? And for me, it's always, we've got exceptional alignment. We've got kind of neutral. It's like, okay, it's neither here or there. And then problematic, right? Like where we're misaligned on things. And it's those misalignments that I want to catch quickly.
Sure.
This question would have been really difficult 10 years ago, but I've got to say that the cost, and it's an investment of sending out feeling meters, things to figure out trust, communication skills, especially with outside parties. The survey tools are pretty easy these days. Yeah. So, if you really want metrics, let's be honest, you survey your clients. Now, you can't do it every year. So if you have a large client base, you rotate it, right? Like, 1/3 each year or something. But And I'm not a big fan of long surveys. If somebody asks me more than 3 questions, I'm kind of out. You know what I mean? Like some of these banks are like, books of questions. Yeah. But I would say that's the metrics. You have to ask the outside parties in a way that's easy, it's fun, it's quick click. And I don't think most businesses I meet do not use something like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's.
And I think if the organization is large enough too that you can do this, I think having these monthly check-ins and quarterly check-ins from like account rep style people outside of like the execution and delivery folks also provides this place that's outside of the stuff they're delivering to have those more casual conversations where you can check in, because this is very effective too. Like, just like, how are things going? This is what I'm being told we're doing for you. Do you have any other? And then all of these other things can kind of come up. Those sort of soft skills that you were talking about earlier, Jen, like those are some other, like, again, they're still process oriented to your point, Bruce. Like you can still, like, did you do one of these every month for each customer? Is this happening quarterly also? Like, and having somebody who's outside the delivery, aspect of what you're doing can really also be effective in getting some of that, like those soft metrics that are not as, again, you're not wrong, Jen. Like another survey is not hard to do, but there's so many surveys, right? So like having that there can also be effective. And it depends on the company. If it's a product company, you kind of have to do that, right? If it's a SaaS company, you have to do those kinds of things.
Yeah. Any last advice for folks that say a leader listening in on this is trying to figure out where to start on this? Where would you suggest they kind of begin this process of putting role scorecards or some kind of performance management system in place?
I would just say start. Write down a couple things that, first of all, organizational goals. Even that's going to evolve. Yeah. And of course, I'm going to tell you to go on the internet and Google. I mean, at this point, they're giving back pretty good information online. Just start. And inclusivity. I say this again. Do it with somebody. If you don't have somebody to do it with a business peer and friend. And build it out that way. Help somebody else.
And I think there's 2 pieces. Ask yourself why you're not doing it now, right? Because there's likely some friction in your mind that say, I don't have time for this, right? Like, I just where I was at. Like, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how busy we are? Like, and like understanding like the impact this has on the efficiency of your organization and visibility for your leadership team, including yourself if you're one of the leaders. It's so powerful. And then I think the other piece to getting started is, if you're worried about how much time this is going to take up on your meetings, like learn about how to run really efficient meetings. Like there's ways to do this without it interfering at all. Like it really becomes like, boy, does this move you forward.
Well, and I think if done right, actually takes a whole bunch of other meeting time away, right? Like you can do it. Totally. Yeah. My little trick is I always start with the CEO. Like I start with the CEO. I do a role card with the CEO, and once we figured them out, then we start working down the leadership, because it's impossible for them to do it until they've actually had it done for themselves, and they see it. They see the power on, and actually, I mean, I've had many CEOs who they do this and like, oh my gosh, this is amazing because now I know what I do.
Yeah.
And I know what I shouldn't do and what I need
Yeah.
to give to the next people.
Because they probably never had it done for them before.
No, exactly.
Actually.
Because they haven't really sat down and thought about, what are the 5 to 8 things that are really, really important
That's
activities
great.
that drive value in the
That's
organization.
great. Yeah.
This has been great. We're already at time here. Jen, if people want to find out more about you, get more information, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, just find Jennifer Goldman on LinkedIn or my virtual COO, and you'll find me.
Great. And Eric?
Just look for me at yourvisioncatalyst.com and just reach out there or reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'm on LinkedIn and Bruce at Eckfeldt.com is my email address. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, I'll make sure that all of our information is in the notes here and is on the page. So thank you both so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.